Hello makers, Ruth here. In this video, we're going to be working with some clay, but we're not going to be working with typical clay. We're going to be working with some air dry clay. What I like about this clay is that you don't need a kiln or a wheel or anything fancy. You can just build with your hands and then it dries in a matter of days. Then you can paint it or seal it or do whatever you want with it. And it's not as messy as clay art can sometimes be. So let's talk about what we're doing today. We're going to be making some clay beads. So here are a couple examples here. You can see I've made some different size round beads and a necklace. Another example I have is some different shape beads I turned into a key ring. So the clay beads that we're making today, they don't have to be part of a necklace or jewelry. You can use them for anything really. But I just wanted to show a couple examples of how our clay beads might turn out before we start our making process. So I'll move these out of the way. So let's talk a little bit about the supplies we need. We aren't going to need much today. This video is going to be a two-part video. We're going to talk about the making today. Because the clay needs a few days up to a week to dry, we're going to come back in the next video and talk about painting and sealing. This video is only going to focus on the making part. So in your illustrated instructions, you'll see one that says clay beads. Now this isn't in your kit, but in your kit inside the welcome packet, you'll see the link for our resource page. Once you go online and click on that resource page, you'll see all those illustrated instructions and other videos that you have access to. We're going to be using the clay beads. Now, the illustrated instructions have the whole process laid out from the making to painting and sealing, but we're going to do that first half today. Like I said, in the next video, we'll focus on the painting and sealing, but we're going to really spend time today working on those first three steps. So just like all our illustrated instructions, we have our list of supplies at the top. I'm going over those right now, and then that process is laid out step by step. Now you'll notice there are several supplies listed here. We're only going to need two of them today. What we're going to need is the air dry clay, which looks like this, and the skewers, which look like this. These are going to be found inside your kit. Now, skewers are kind of thin, so they may kind of get stuck on the sides. You can also use toothpicks. You can use pencils, a paintbrush handle, chopsticks, an awl, anything that's kind of long and skinny will work. We need those skewers to kind of poke holes through our beads. Okay? So these are the two supplies that we'll need today. As I mentioned, earlier. Those other supplies we'll use when we get to the painting and sealing stage. So the truth is, the only supplies that we're going to be working with today are the Model Magic and the skewers. Okay. Now, Model Magic is the air dry clay that we're working with today. What I like about Model Magic is that it's not messy. It's really lightweight. It's kind of durable, more durable than other air dry clay. And it doesn't stick to your hands. It feels better in your hands. So if you are someone who doesn't like getting things on your hands, this is the perfect clay to work with. Now we're working with white Model Magic, and that's so we have the opportunity to paint, embellish however we want. So Model Magic, if you do like this and you want to make more, Model Magic does come in a variety of colors, but you can also use white Model Magic and add pigment to the clay as you're building, and that'll change the color as well. So we're going to be using Model Magic, like I said. Another air dry clay that's a lot of fun to work with. It's also a Crayola brand. Comes in a container like this. Now this air dry clay feels more like your typical clay. Your hands will get a little messier and you need a lot of water to kind of keep that clay moist while you're working with it. Again, we don't need that typical like water. Or mess when we're working with a Model Magic, which makes it a little better in my books. But let's go ahead and start by opening our clay. So I'm just going to cut the edge off, open it up. Inside, you'll see a little kind of pad of the air dry clay. So the first step for us is to soften that clay. And so what we're going to do is take it in our hands and just kind of squeeze it. Right? We're trying to soften it up so it's a little easier to work with. And you may find that as you're moving that clay around, you may be able to feel pretty quickly that it's softening up. So just kind of take that clay and roll it around in your hands. I'm going to move this up a little bit. One of the things that I really enjoy about clay art, making with clay, is that it's almost like getting a little massage while we're doing it. The truth is, there are so many different pressure points in our hands, right? And so when we roll that clay across all those pressure points, applies a little pressure to it. Now, those pressure points are connected to different parts of our body. And so when they're touched, when they are massaged, you can feel it all over. So it is working with clay can feel really calming and soothing. So what we're doing, I just want to invite you to kind of roll that clay around in your hand. Kind of feel it, roll it across your palms, up on your fingers. The main purpose of kind of rolling that clay right now is to soften it up and get it ready to mold, to shape. But we're also kind of giving ourselves a little hand massage too, which is kind of nice, right? So I'm just kind of rolling that clay around. Our next step is to break it off into pieces. Now that we've gotten it kind of soft, we're going to break it off. Now we can decide what size beads we want. If you want different sizes, break off different size pieces. If you want them all to be similar in size, break off the similar size pieces. I like doing different sizes, so I'm going to break off some different size pieces. Just kind of, I'm going to probably make 5 beads. So I'm just going to kind of go through now that I've torn them in pieces and just kind of move them around, squish them, mold them, right? Let them roll in my hands, roll around in my hands. Now, as you're rolling, we've broken them up and we're going to start rolling them into shapes. Now, typically when we think of beads, we think of circles, balls, right? But the truth is they can be any shape at all. My example here, my key ring that I showed earlier, I've got some flat beads, a square bead, a long bead. So play around with it. If you don't want to do the round ones, totally okay. Make them all sorts of different sizes, but just kind of roll them until you get the shape you want. It's always good to start with the ball and then kind of molding it into the square or whatever shape it is that you're wanting to do. You can also do like hearts and stars. Be creative with it. Have fun with it. Like I said, the main point of, or the main, yeah, the main purpose of this time is making those beads and kind of feeling it in our hands. So have fun creating those different shapes. And I'm just kind of, as I'm rolling it, I'm just kind of checking it to make sure it's round, right? And I also want to make sure I'm not seeing any cracks in it as I'm doing that rolling, right? But you'll notice if you've worked with clay before, you'll notice that I'm not getting any clay on my hands, right? So that's nice, right? Less messy. And so just kind of take your time rolling them together, making their shapes. And I'm going to do round ones. So I'm making sure all my little beads are round and that there's no crack in them. And as I'm making them, just kind of lining them up towards the top of my workspace. Now, typically when we have done supplies, we've talked about creating a workspace to kind of protect our surface, protect our clothes, protect our body. And usually that's helpful when we're working with paint or ink or any kind of pigment or adhesive. But because we're working with this air dry clay, this Model Magic, you'll see it's not messy at all. It is helpful to have a work surface, and I always work off a piece of foil, but it's not necessary because everything's happening in our hands. And you can see that I'm just kind of rolling that clay between my hands, making sure it's round. I'm doing the round balls, but you can do whatever shape you like. And I'm going to do my big piece of clay last. But do that same thing. Just kind of work it, roll it, and kind of enjoy the pressure of that clay against your hands. That little hand massage that we're giving ourselves. And you can see I'm just kind of checking as I'm rolling just to make sure it kind of stays round, stays the shape I want it to be. Just kind of rolling it. You can see I've still got a few little cracks in mine, so I'm just kind of taking my time, just rolling it. The good news is that if you make a bead and you decide, you know what, I don't like that shape, because it's clay and it takes a while to dry, you can mold it, remold it, and shape it into whatever shape you want it to be. That's the nice thing about the working with clay. All right, so I think I've got my round beads together. So our next step is to poke those holes through. So you can see in our illustrated instructions, as I shared before, we're just doing that first half in this video. Taking that clay, rolling it into the sizes we want it to be, which we just did, and then carefully sliding those beads onto the skewer. Now these holes that we're making, we're going to leave them on the skewer, and as it dries, that inside will dry as well. So we're just going to very carefully add those beads to our skewer. So I'm only going to use one skewer today. I think I can get all my beads on one. But what I'm going to do is take my skewer and I'm going to start on one side, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to push all the way through. I'm going to start with the point of my skewer, and I'm going to kind of twist, give it a little pressure and twist. The reason we're doing that slight pressure and twist instead of just forcing it through is that I don't want to change the shape of my bead. If I were to add a little more pressure, it could flatten it or change it from that round ball shape. And so I'm giving slight pressure and twisting. And you can see it's coming through that end. Right. So I want to push it. I'm going all the way to the end of my skewer here. And I'm going to be putting all my beads on this skewer. So I've got that bead on. You may notice that the bead is tight, tightly enclosed around that skewer. As it dries, it's going to shrink a little bit. So I'm just going to start adding all my beads to the skewer, doing the same thing, twisting and gently pushing, putting it in one side and out the other. And it is okay if, as you're putting your beads on your skewer, the beads that are already there, it's okay if they start kind of going around in circles or loosening up. That's totally fine. Yeah. So I've got two beads on here. I'm going to kind of continue with my process here. Stabbing, stabbing my bead, slightly pressing and twisting that skewer. So that bead goes all the way through. With each one of my beads. Just gently, gently sliding them on. And then I'll put my last bead on here, doing that same process, stabbing and gently twisting. All right, so I've got all my beads on my skewer. It kind of makes me think of a solar system, how they're lined up on this skewer. So I've got my beads on my skewer. Our next step, which we can see in our illustrated instructions, that next step is to let it dry completely. Now, the truth is, it could take a couple days. It could take a week. Um, Sometimes it's very dependent on the weather. So if it's very rainy, very humid, it'll take a little longer. If it's drier, it'll drier in the atmosphere, it'll dry at a faster rate. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my skewer of beads and I'm just putting them on a tray. You can see my skewer is hanging off. I'm going to kind of turn it a little bit so you can see the beads are not touching the bottom. They're not touching anything but the skewer. And so where I set my beads to dry is important. If I set them in a place where they're touching something, they're going to sort of get flat, right? Because I want round beads, I'm going to set them in this container so nothing is touching them, right? And I'm going to let them dry that way. Yeah. And as I said, it may take a day or two, it may take a week, but just kind of let them dry at their own rate. The smaller it is, the faster it's going to dry. This bigger bead that I have here, it's going to take a little longer, but I'm just going to kind of show a little patience and wait for them all to be nice and dry. Now, next week when we do the next video, you'll be able to see how to paint and seal your finished piece. So happy rolling, everyone, and we'll see you soon.